Greetings, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. The Federal Reserve is at the center of the new economic relief bill, and it's about control. Let's explore. Yes, indeed, over the last hours of the weekend, Congress has finally reached a deal, even though I'm not really sure what it's going to be. Based off this article here from KTNV Las Vegas, Congress has reached a deal, a new economic relief package with the $600 stimulus payments to each American. And we know, many of us who pay attention to this type of thing and understand what is going on, is that's going to increase debt and deficit spending even more, although this is under $1 trillion apparently. And so that is, at least, is not as much as it was in the past. But nonetheless, it will be $1 trillion added to our debt, and more than likely there will be another package coming after this one. But nonetheless, let's take a look at this. This is coming to us originally from the Associated Press. Top congressional lawmakers struck a late-night agreement on the last major obstacle to a COVID-19 economic relief package costing nearly $1 trillion, clearing the way for votes as early as Sunday. A Democratic aide said in an email that an agreement had been reached late Saturday and that the compromise language has been finalized to seal a deal to be unveiled on Sunday. And so far, we've not seen that unveiling, at least as of the recording of this video. The breakthrough involved a fight over the Federal Reserve emergency powers that was diffused by an odd couple, the Senate's top Democrat and a senior conservative Republican. We're getting very, very close, Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said earlier Saturday, as he spent much of the day going back and forth with GOP Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania. Toomey had been pressing a provision to close down the Fed lending facilities that Democrats in the White House said was too broadly worded and would have tied the hands of the incoming Biden administration. The COVID-19 legislation has been held up after months of dysfunction, posturing, and bad faith. The talks turned serious in December as lawmakers on both sides finally faced the deadline of acting before exiting Washington for Christmas. The bill, lawmakers and aides say, would establish a temporary $300 per week supplemental jobless benefits and $600 direct stimulus payments to most Americans, along with a fresh round of subsidies for hard-hit businesses and funding for schools, healthcare providers, and renters facing eviction. Schumer said he hoped both the House and Senate would vote on the measure Sunday. That would take more cooperation than the Senate can usually muster, but a government shutdown deadline loomed at midnight Sunday, and all sides were eager to leave for Christmas. You know, with things like this, major holidays, that is a big motivator for them to actually get something done. But regardless, Toomey defended his controversial provision in a floor speech, which I watched, saying the emergency powers were designed to stabilize capital markets at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic this spring and were expiring at the end of the month anyway. The language he had sought would block the Biden administration from restarting them. Toomey has a stubborn streak, and Democrats held firm as well. But both sides saw the need for a compromise to clear the way for the $900 billion plus COVID-19 relief measure, which was being attached to a $1.4 trillion government-wide spending bill and hosts of other bills that compiled much of Capitol Hill's remaining legislative output of the Trump era. At issue were Fed emergency programs launched amid the pandemic this spring that provided loans to small and mid-sized businesses and bought state and local government bonds. Those bond purchases made it easier for those governments to borrow at a time when their finances were under pressure from job losses and health costs stemming from the pandemic. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said last month that those programs, along with two that purchased corporate bonds, would close at the end of the year, prompting an initial objection by the Fed under the Dodd-Frank financial reform law passed after the Great Recession. The Fed can only set up emergency programs with the support of the Treasury Secretary. Democrats in Congress also said that Toomey was trying to limit the Fed's ability to boost the economy just as Biden prepared to take office. This is about existing authorities that the Fed has had for a very long time to be able to use in an emergency, said Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts. It's about lending authority for helping small businesses, state government, local governments in the middle of a crisis. Toomey, though, disputed that charge, saying that his proposal is emphatically not a broad overhaul of the Federal Reserve's emergency lending authority. The massive package would wrap much of the Capitol Hill's unfinished 2020 business into a take-it-or-leave-it measure that promised to be foot thick or more. House lawmakers would probably have only a few hours to study it before voting as early as Sunday night. And isn't that the case? Typically, these big, voluminous packages have very, very little time to be reviewed. And it's one of those things where, as Nancy Pelosi famously said, we have to pass the bill in order to see what is in it. A Senate vote would possibly be on Monday. One more short-term funding bill will be needed to avoid the looming deadline, or a partial shutdown of non-essential agencies would start on Monday. The $900 billion package was being finished as the pandemic delivered its most fearsome surge yet, killing more than 3,000 victims per day and straining the healthcare system. While vaccines were on the way, most people wouldn't get them for months. Jobless claims were on the rise. The emerging agreement would deliver more than $300 billion in aid to businesses, as well as an extra $300 per week for the jobless renewal of state benefits that would otherwise expire right after Christmas. It included $600 in direct payments to individuals, vaccine distribution funds, money for renters, schools, the Postal Service, and people needing food aid. It'd be the most significant legislative response to the pandemic since the landmark CARES Act passed virtually unanimously in March, delivering $1.8 trillion in aid, more generous $600 per week bonus jobless benefits, and a $1,200 direct payments to individuals. The government-wide appropriations bill would fund agencies through next September. That measure was likely to provide a last $1.4 billion installment for President Donald Trump's U.S. Mexico border wall as a condition of winning his signature. And, so everybody's going to throw their little things in there, but really the core of this is the Federal Reserve. And I believe Toomey was right. In fact, I watched that speech, and he said that, these were measures that were very rarely used, and they shouldn't just be pulled out on a whim. The Federal Reserve essentially has been granted much more power and the leeway in times like this. And they've already been doing things that before the pandemic hit that were very controversial, in my opinion, but nobody talked about, known as repurchase agreements, where they added a bunch of liquidity in between these banks to keep them solvent or what have you, at lower interest rates than what was being charged. It's just ridiculous. They just continue to print and digitize money like it's going out of style. And my guess, this compromise, a compromise in Washington means that usually the opposition gets a lot more of the 80-20. Typically, whatever is for granting more powers to the big federal voluminous government that we have, compromise means that they get more, as those who want to limit the powers of the federal government get less. I know that the Federal Reserve is a private institution, and I think that is why it can get away with so much that they can get away. It's a private, privately held bank, but they are obviously work very much in hand with the government. We'd all know about the idea of corporate capitalism or crony capitalism, and in the sense where big tech, big corporations essentially do the bidding of the federal government and have policies that protect themselves for sure. And that is a dangerous move to socialism. And essentially, that was kind of what the fight was. Toomey did his best to try to limit that by putting some restrictions on the Federal Reserve, which I think are muchly needed. And he's even admitted that another Congress and another session could easily undo what he has done. But he says that, we've got to provide some restraints. We can't just full throttled open end be able to do what they want. Of course, the Democrats will certainly try and protect and be able to give a Biden administration full leeway and to be able to do what they want with the Federal Reserve. And make no mistake, we're going to see more of this spending, more into money supply creation, and it's going to be all but positive for gold and silver in the coming year as they continue to do this type of thing. And with this coming into passage, expect that gold and silver prices will rise. Every Sunday night, we do a market watch where we see what the markets do when they open up in Asia at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. So it's going to be very interesting to see how they react to this bill, which may or may not be voted on today, but likely tomorrow, Monday, then will reach the Senate and be voted on. This thing looks like it's going to be a done deal all before Christmas. And I think that in a time when usually the markets are pretty tame and not a lot of activity going on, this year has been quite a year, and we are going to probably see them react differently. And I believe that we'll see gold and silver go up because of this, knowing that more money is going to be spent, and they basically codified it. So there you go. Post your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch, and encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.